I had a dear friend of mine say to me once, the pesky thing about the truth is it doesn't ever seem to go away. Well, here at Project Truth Ministries, we're not going away, and we're going to keep delivering this Hebrew Cochin manuscript of the book of Revelation to you, to the listener. And we're going to keep this study going, and you're going to keep seeing all these amazing things in it. And we are going to share with you chapter 8. As always, I have Hebrew grammarian Janice Baca with me. Please say hello, Janice.
Shalom, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. It is getting really exciting. Every chapter unfolds something so unique and so phenomenal. And only in the Scroll of Mysteries will you see these things because it is the only one at this point in time that I know of that is actually connecting us to the Tanakh, the Old Testament. These are eye-opening things that we're finding. And of course, we will be encouraged, we will be strengthened because we, the people of Jehovah, the servants of Jehovah, the children of Israel, when we seek him, he'll take care of everything. He's just showing us what's going on. So thank you for having me here today, and let's move forward.
And in this chapter, we are going to see the seventh seal removed. We are also going to see the first, second, third, and fourth shofar or trumpet blown. And so this is pretty exciting stuff. And we can't wait to get into it with you. So let's go on to the reading. And now the reading for chapter 8. And when he opened the seventh, all were silent in the heavens for a while. I saw 7 messengers coming before Jehovah, and they were given 7 shofars. Another messenger came walking near to the holy place, and in his hand was a censer of gold. He was given much incense to deliver prayers for the holy ones before the holy place and before the throne. The smoke from the incense of the holy ones went up from the hand of the messenger before Jehovah. The messenger took the censer and filled it with fire and poured it upon the earth, and then came the sounds of thunders and lightnings. Then the 7 messengers with the 7 shofars prepared to blow. The first messenger blew, and there was hail and fire mixed with blood. Then it fell upon the earth, and a third of the trees burned, and all the greenery of the field burned. The second blew, and something like a great mountain burned with fire, then went into the sea, and a third of the sea was blood. And a third of the creatures of the sea were put to death, and a third of the ships were sunk. Then the third blew, and a star burned and fell from the heavens upon a third of the springs of water, and the name of the star was scarlet. A third of the waters became bitter, and because of its bitterness, many of the sons of man died. The fourth blew, and a third part of the sun, moon, and the stars eclipsed, and a third of the day did not shine, nor the night. Then I saw and heard a messenger hovering in the heavens, and he shouted with a great voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those dwelling upon the earth, because the voice of the shofars which are required are yet to be blown from the 3 messengers." All right, and as always, we're going to share with you the image of chapter 8, brought to you in part by a dear friend of us, Kurt Sutton, who took this photo. He flew to Cambridge University, and we're so grateful for him to do that for us. Thank you. Shout out to Kurt. And now let's get into verse 1. And it says, "And when he opened the seventh, all were silent in the heavens for a while."
What's really interesting about this is the Aramaic word there, chad, at the very end. It's the very last word. And these are the types of findings that we want to see because they spoke, of course, Hebrew. You want to see the rabbinic Hebrew with the Aramaic words or phrases, or maybe the lamed as a direct object marker. I mean, there's so many different things. There's a spelling changes that is influenced by what we call Aramaisms. And this is one of those. And of course, what you're looking at is a idiom that says for a while. It doesn't say for a half an hour, it says for a while. So this is
Yeah.
another marker for, and another big marker, Hebrew marker for the Cochin Revelation.
Yeah. And when comparing to the King James, it says a half an hour. So that's pretty specific, knowing how the Greek mind is and how the Greek thought patterns, they would need to know how much time has elapsed. That is just how Greek mindset works. They need to be specific, whereas the Hebrew is qualitative, not quantitative. And so for a
Absolutely.
while is you just have to deal with this for a while. It's an unspecified time. That's very Hebraic like. And so you can see
Very
how
Hebraic.
this got pinned down. Maybe there was a scribe who was like, I'm gonna make it a time because I'm uncomfortable with it not saying how long.
I have no idea why they would put a specified time, but it just absolutely is baffling as to how this would be changed over time. But hey, Brian, what does the Crawford Aramaic say? Let's look at that if you don't
Let's check
mind.
that one out. It also says 1/2 hour.
Okay, so this is exactly what I have been finding. There, about last year, I started doing an original analysis on the Crawford Aramaic, and I found that whether it was Murdoch or Crawford, they appear to be translations from the Greek. Now, the Crawford Aramaic, you see some changes that they may change some pronouns, they're a little different. I found that. But we're going to continue to do an analysis of the Crawford Aramaic, and you're going to see that whether it's the Murdoch, which is probably maybe a translation from the Greek, that the Crawford may possibly also be a translation from the Greek with some edits.
Very good to know. And we'll definitely keep checking with those as we go along. Now let's look at verse 2. It says, I saw 7 messengers coming before Jehovah, and they were given 7 shofars. And I like to point out that's very important that we have shofar and not trumpet there, because a shofar is a very specific blowing instrument, some sort of animal horn, a kudu, a ram's horn, a goat horn, or a antelope horn. Very important to see shofar there. And
Absolutely.
let me just say, and in this verse, we have the 7 shofars, which we know 7 is the godly number. We have 7 messengers and 7 shofars in this verse, with Jehovah there in the middle. And 7 is the number of God. And 7 also refers to divine perfection and or completeness.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. The 7 shofars, Brian. And you're right. It's the shofar is extremely important to see versus the trumpets. And was it originally shofar in the Greek and they just translated as trumpet? I don't know, but it certainly doesn't match the language of the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Can we check to see what the Crawford Aramaic has to say?
Yeah.
What do they call it?
They do a shofar slash trumpet. So I don't know if it's an interpretation. Let's check the Murdoch, and the Murdoch has trumpets. So they're playing the fence, it appears to be for the Crawford. And then the Murdoch is specifically choosing trumpets.
Absolutely.
Now, it's also important to note anytime you come across Jehovah, God's holy name, that we check all the manuscripts, and we have in the scriptures 2009 they choose Elohim. The King James has God, which would be from Elohim. And what does our Crawford have? Crawford Aramaic, that has
They
Alha.
have Allah, which is also God.
Okay. So we have a unique marker here again. We are using the more powerful stance of using his holy name, which comes with so much weight behind it. We are called to use his name, make oaths, swear, and pray by his name. So awesome stuff.
Man,
All right, let's go on to verse 3. It says, another messenger came walking near to the holy place, and in his hand was a censer of gold. He was given much incense to deliver prayers for the holy ones before the holy place and before the throne.
it's always interesting to see the censers, and I think of the censers that was described with the priests that had the censers in their hand, of course, the censer that Aaron had, and these clearly represent the prayers of the saints. And it's amazing when you think about the prayers of the saints, and here it's in a censer before Jehovah, which becomes a sweet fragrance before Jehovah. I'm very, very passionate about prayers and our prayer time and setting aside that time of prayer. And then when you get the visual of your prayers actually being collected and being brought before Jehovah, that's a powerful imagery.
That is very powerful.
And so, why is this important, Brian? Because of the fact that we are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation before Jehovah. This is extremely important that we continue to pray for others and intercede for others. If there's ever been a time where there is an absolute need for intercession and prayer, we need to do this now. And so, this is extremely important that we offer up our prayer to fall upon the censer of gold.
Absolutely. We need to be praying all the time for God to be in our lives and to help us.
Man.
Yeah. Now let's look into some text criticism for this verse. And there's a few things here to point out. One in particular, in our Hebrew Cochin, it says walking near to the holy place, whereas the King James itself says stood at the altar. Now, the altar is at the holy place, but the holy place is technically the temple. So we just got to look a little change in focus. Instead of the altar, now it is a temple. And you can see here it says the holy ones. Holy ones are the set apart ones, the set apart people. And then that is in the English King James, you have saints. Saints is set apart holy ones too. Just want to point that out. They were just choosing a different route of describing the same thing. And then further on in the King James, it then saying upon the golden altar. So that's a golden altar, whereas the Hebrew Cochin says holy place. And it says before the throne, and both of them. But just to make some clarification, the throne that it's talking about is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is a throne. And is
Um,
there anything else you want to point out, Janice, for this
well,
verse?
let's just check with the Crawford Aramaic and see what they have. So notice in the Crawford, they also say stands and at the sacrifice altar. So we've got here something more like the Greek. Okay. And so to him, her, or it was given a censer of gold, and given to him, her, it fragrance much in prayer, all of them, the holy upon the sacrifice altar, and rises and goes and comes, a vapor does, of fragrance and prayers of the holy from the hand of the messenger before Allah. So that may be a little bit clunky, but this is more in a interlinear style. However, it still seems to match more in alignment with the Greek than it does to the Cochin. So when you hear people say that the Scroll of Mysteries, the Cochin Revelation, was a translation from Aramaic or either Greek, I don't see that at this point in time. It just doesn't seem to line up. But
No.
we'll continue to do this analysis.
And that's because anytime we have unique characteristics in our manuscript, they are not found in the Aramaic. and they are not found in the Greek either.
That's exactly right.
And to have both of them occur at the same time consistently shows it's not from Greek and it's not from Aramaic. All right, let's go on to verse 4. Verse 4 says, "The smoke from the incense of the holy ones went up from the hand of the messenger before Jehovah."
So, what a beautiful imagery this is. Now, the incense that is such a sweet fragrance before Jehovah is now going up before the throne of Jehovah. And I love this because we get to see the name of Jehovah and that we come to this place to say, my prayers are heard. And absolutely profound. It's not that I don't mind seeing Elohim, but surely makes an impact when you see Jehovah.
Mhm. And notice that we have in the English and in the Aramaic, it says the prayers or with the prayers.
That is interesting. Let's see what also the Crawford Aramaic has. And of course, the vapor, the fumes go up with the fragrance in prayers of the holy ones. I'm sure it's what it means. And from the hand of the messenger before Allah. Again, we've got Allah. We don't have Jehovah, we have Allah. So we have this again, which seems to come into alignment more with the Greek than it does with the scroll of mysteries.
All right, verse 5, and it says, "The messenger took the censer and filled it with fire and poured it out upon the earth, and then came the sound of thunders and lightnings."
Wow, Brian. This gives me an imagery about the the anointing and the outpouring of the ruach of fire, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot of questions have always risen about what is this spirit of fire, this anointing of fire that comes upon the people. And I think honestly, it is to do the very thing that Yeshua has come to do, and that is to create in each of us a clean heart that we may see Elohim. So therefore, it will take the fire to purify us, to bring the dross to the top, and that it can be taken from within us, and that we will be cleaned and pure. I think this what it could mean. I mean, at least that's the imagery I get. And then now there's these thunders and lightnings and all of this exciting things going on. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, my mind goes into purification mode. Fire is the ultimate purifier, and even making metals, you heat it up and you keep heating. You get fire involved when you're trying to make something pure, pure gold, pure silver. You got to get all the imperfections out. So that's kind of where my mind's going with that. Notice in the King James, it says of the altar. It says filled with fire of the altar, whereas ours does not have of the altar. This is just fire being poured out. So that's kind of unique. We also don't have it stating, and there were voices. It just goes into saying that there's sounds of thunders and lightnings. So that's kind of unique. They've added voices in, and they've added that this fire is coming from the altar. And also at the very end of the King James, it says an earthquake. So they've now stuck in an earthquake event instead of it just being fire poured out. So things are burning and thunders and lightnings. Maybe the
So
thunders
just
and lightnings are causing the fires.
So just to add to that, the sounds, when you see the word kol or kolot for plural, it can be sounds or it can be voices. And so this is where interpretation comes in. Is this the voices of thunders and lightnings, or is it the sounds of thunders and lightnings? And however it's translated is based on the individual's personal interpretation. So that's the reason why that people need to look at the interlinear tables. But the question is, where did this earthquake come from, and what is in the Crawford Aramaic?
Let's pop over to check that because the man what's the one? Murdoch. The Murdoch has an earthquake at the end. Let's see what the Crawford has. And there we go. says, and shaking and
Oh, there you
earthquakes.
go. And there, yeah, so this tells you earthquakes. Most likely, this Crawford Aramaic is also a translation from the Greek with some few edits that I've seen throughout. But yeah, very profound finding.
At the very least, they're in agreements, and at the very most, they are coming from the same source, being Greek.
That's
So we'll
surely
just,
that's what it appears.
yep, and we'll just keep hammering this point for all those people out there who are hungry for all the information. We'll give it to you. All right, let's go on to verse 6. And it says, then the seven messengers with the seven shofars prepared to blow.
Yes, and this is where I wanted to bring about the blowing of the shofar. A lot of people like to take that word taka, tokea, and make it sounding. This actually, taka, can be blowing of, say, glass, the blowing of glass. It's the blowing of anything, blowing of a feather up in the air. It's the blowing. It's literally blowing. And when people translate it as, oh no, they sounded the shofar. Well, that's not the literal translation. And I just wanted to drive that point to our listeners, is because this is oftentimes mistranslated.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Janice, for pointing that out. On the offset, though, looking at the verses, they are very, very similar. I don't see a whole lot of differences. Nothing worth pointing out.
The question I have is, what does a Crawford Aramaic have? Do they have sounding or do they have blowing?
Let's check it out. All right. It says sounding or declaring.
There you go. There's the sounding. That's exactly what lines up with the Greek. Wow.
Yeah. So it's very cool to see these unique differences. All right. Let's move on to verse 7. And it states, the first messenger blew, and there was hail and fire mixed with blood. Then it fell upon the earth, and a third of the trees burned, and all the greenery of the field burned. That doesn't sound too good, does it, Janice?
Sounds dreadful, actually. And this is the reason why we've really got to pay attention and get on the right side of Jehovah.
Now, the verse in comparing to the King James and the Aramaic, they're actually pretty close. They just use a little bit different way of wording at the very end. So let me show you with the King James. It says at the end of it, we're going to focus in on this part. It says, and the third part of trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And if you look at ours, it says, and a third of the trees burned, and all the greenery of the field burned. So it's just kind of a different way of saying greenery of the field would be the grass. We're just expressing it in a slightly different way.
So here's where I'm curious, because we have greenery and it truly is greenery. And of course, the field, it truly says field. Now, if we've got here from the scriptures and the Murdoch Aramaic that both says grass, then the kicker will be, let's see what the Crawford Aramaic says, because if it says grass, well, we may have something here.
And
And
here it
looky there,
is.
the green
Let's
plants of the earth, the grass. You see that? It says grass.
yeah.
Profound. Looks like it's still confirming that it has come from a translation from the Greek.
Yeah, we are very hungry for the Crawford today. And our listeners will benefit from this. All right, let's move on to verse 8. Verse 8 says, the second blew, that being the second trumpet, the second blew, and something like a great mountain burned with fire, then went into the sea, and a third of the sea was blood. And I take that blood to be a reference for death. So things were dying, and maybe the color was changing as well. But We have debris. There's debris falling from this great thing burning and falling into the ocean, and it's killing animals. It's killing the sea life. Now, my question is, could it be an asteroid falling into the ocean? Well, the
Hmm.
answer to that would be probably not, because the next verse then has an asteroid falling. And this thing that's being described is like a great mountain. And so there appears to be some kind of fire and earthquake happening, and the mountain's on fire, or something like a mountain burns and falls into the sea, or is spewing into the sea, perhaps a volcano type event, and it is poisoning and destroying the sea life. So that's kind of my thoughts, and the death is happening. What are your thoughts, Janice?
Well, I actually lean towards the fact that it's probably a volcano because it's like a great mountain and it is burning with fire and it is. And I think that that makes more sense in this case.
All right, verse 9, it says, "And a third of the creatures of the sea were put to death, and a third of the ships were sunk."
Literally, the ships, it says they were swamped. And you see this imagery that things are just dying and the creatures of the sea are dying. They're put to death. This actually, they're truly being caused to die. And what a dreadful scene this is. And we do see some the ships in the Murdoch Aramaic are saying they're destroyed. And of course, the Greek to English says in the scriptures they were destroyed. Here it says in the Scroll of Mysteries, the Cochin Revelation, that they were swamped or sunk.
Swamped makes sense to me, because if you have this volcano like event and things are spewing into the ocean, poisoning the ocean, you got debris floating around, you're gonna have mud, you're gonna have all kinds of gunk, and maybe the levels of the ocean changes, and you run aground and you got ships just stuck, not able to motor around because there's junk in the water. That's all kind of fitting with this big cataclysmic event.
Absolutely, a very dreadful scene.
Mhm.
So, Brian, let's look and see what the Crawford Aramaic says. Are the ships going to be destroyed or are they going to be swamped or sunk? Let's check that out.
All
And
right.
behold, it says they were destroyed. Again, Brian, we have the Crawford Aramaic matching up with the
Mhm.
Greek, more aligning with the Greek, and very profound findings that this Cochin, the Scroll of Mysteries, is standing on its own again, pretty much.
Yeah, and even like, think about you translating from the Hebrew to Greek. The interpretation of it being swamped or sunk is that it is destroyed. That makes sense. And that would be how it would get passed down to end up in English or Aramaic as destroyed. It's an interpretation, and that is sometimes how these paths of translating to another language goes. So we
Absolutely.
can completely understand why they chose it. All right, let's go on to verse 10, in which it states, "Then the third blew, and a star burned and fell from the heavens upon a third of the spring water." And so I think the point to that is it's fresh water that people are going to drink, and that they're not going to be able to drink because it's been turned, which we'll see in the following verses.
Absolutely. And then you have the scriptures that says like a torch, burning like a torch. So
Mhm.
this clearly must have been someone's marginal note that was later added. That's my thinking. And then of
Yeah.
course you have here in the Murdoch Aramaic that says burning like a lamp. So here
Yep.
we have
I was
both of them lining up.
Yep, and the King James also has it as it were a lamp. And so you would see this as, let's add some further information in here. Perhaps it was a marginal note that a priest needed when he's reading this verse and elaborating and trying to teach this verse to people. It was like a lamp. So we can understand how some of these things work their way into the text.
Of course. Let's check to see what the Crawford Aramaic says. Like a flame
There
that
you go.
burns like a flame. See that second line there?
Burns like a
The
flame.
star,
Yep.
the planet, it burns like a flame. Again, we have the Crawford Aramaic lining up more with
Mhm.
the Greek. So
Mhm. And
interesting.
you can read that as burns like a flame from a lamp because that's what flames
Hmm.
do on a lamp. Okay. That's interesting. Very interesting. All right, let's move on to verse 11. And it says, "And the name of the star was Scarlet. A third of the waters became bitter, and because of its bitterness, many of the sons of man died." Now, that word bitter there, Janice, is that Mara?
You are correct. It is modern, bitter.
And that makes
And
sense when I think back to, and that reminds me of Naomi there in the story of Ruth, where she became bitter, so she wanted to be called bitter and changed her name to Mara.
absolutely. And I'm glad that you pronounced it that way because that Naomi's name, a lot of people mispronounce it. That the kamatz under her, the noon of her name is actually a kamatz katan, which gives it the O sound. So you have Naomi. And yes, you're correct. She wanted to be called Mar, bitter. And so there you go. You have the bitterness.
Mhm.
And so then you have the star, it was scarlet. Now, told a lot, it can be either scarlet or it can be worm. And so, which it is, scarlet is here chosen, but just consider that it could be scarlet or it could be worm.
Yep. And, that pairs up with the Old Testament, in which you read all these verses about scarlet. Well, when you look in the Hebrew, it's crimson worm, is what it's trying to pronounce, or scarlet worm. And that is a color, a dye color that comes from that specific type of worm. So it's just interesting that we're pairing up there, whereas the English and the Aramaic is using wormwood. Now, I want to talk about wormwood very briefly because there's some interesting pair ups, even to the Greek and English here. Wormwood, the plant wormwood, is also known as Artemisia absinthium. And that word comes from the Greek goddess Artemis, which is the goddess of childbirth. This plant also is used in alcoholic beverages and gastrointestinal parasite cleanses. Its name is derived from it being so bitter. It's extremely bitter. And it's very interesting that there was a place on this planet that was called Wormwood that had a cataclysmic event happen. And perhaps it could be a type and shadow. That place I am talking about is Chernobyl. Chernobyl is the Russian word for wormwood. And of course, we all remember what happened at Chernobyl. It was a nuclear power meltdown, and the whole place turned nuclear, all the region around it. And so, is there a parallel here? Is there some kind of message type shadow that God is sharing with us that this wormwood is somehow linked to nuclear? Maybe. I don't know. But it's very interesting set of facts that makes me think about the Bible and wormwood, this star falling from heaven. Is it a nuclear bomb? I don't know. Just interesting. Thought I'd share
There,
it.
we're going to see something like this in the future in chapter 17, Brian, that the Father will use words because the Father exists outside of time. He created time. He doesn't exist in time, but he created the time capsule, so to speak, that we live in. Therefore, he's using words that will have significant meaning for at one place in time. It means one thing, and then it actually means something else in another part of the time. Very creative in the way he used these words. So I absolutely believe that possibly this is a message to say this could perhaps mean something that has to do with the nuclear. And I think we need to take that into prayer, into consideration that we may be actually seeing something of John didn't know. He was just telling a story, right? He's just telling the story of what he saw and what was happening. And the words that he used was just simply the words that he understood at that moment in time, but yet it means something significantly different to us today.
Yep, absolutely.
The question I have is, what does the Crawford Aramaic have? Does it have scarlet or worm, or does it have actually wormwood?
Absinthe.
Its name of the star was said absinthe. So, Brian, here's what's interesting about the Crawford Aramaic. They actually are saying the name of this star or planet is called absinthe. This is a poor translation from the Greek, where the absinthe is actually an herb that is wormwood. And this is the Aramaic way of saying this is wormwood. And this now more closely aligns with the Greek, of course, as we expected that it would. But I find it interesting that this is what they would translate it as. That it's bitter. It's a very bitter herb. And then of course the wormwood herb, just all of it's just fascinating. But again, it's just a poor way of translating from Greek to Aramaic. Fascinating.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to verse 12. And it says, the fourth blew, and a third part of the sun, moon, and the stars eclipsed, and a third of the day did not shine, nor the night. Now,
Wow.
I find it very curious that the Cochin revelation is very tight and all
Hmm.
pieced together. If you look at this, it says a third part of the sun, moon, and the stars eclipsed. And that all makes sense. All of those could be covered up. So that makes sense. But they're all tight together, listed. Whereas if you flip over to the King James, what you have is it says something very longer. It stretches them out and it's denoting the third parts over and over. Let me just read that. The third part of the sun was smitten. We don't have smitten. And the third part of the moon and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them were or was darkened. So they are stating the same thing, but it's now being broken up in a longer format, stating that one third over and over. And that's a very Greek mindset thing to do.
Absolutely. And you see in the Scroll of Mysteries, it says the stars were eclipsed. And of course, the Greek here in the scriptures to English, it says the sun was struck. That same kind of it was hit, it was smitten. You got the Murdoch Aramaic says it was smitten. So it seems to indicate that this was struck, something hit it, whereas we have it was eclipsed.
Well, it's going to affect different things. So if you have the sun, the moon, and the stars being covered up partially, well, and then it's not going to shine day or night, that's going to affect all the plant life. And think about the farming and how much they need sunlight. And to not have that, they're going to grow a lot less. Also, think about all these people wanting to go solar. Well, if one third of the sun is blocked out, well, how much solar are you going to get from your solar panels on that day? Not very much.
Absolutely. No, not much at all. And all of this, you can only imagine if people are affected, and it's proven that people are affected by the phases of the moon or the sun or the lack thereof. The people are going to be in complete chaos. This is actually going to be a time of chaos when they're not able to get the sun that they need, the vitamin D. There's going to be sickly people. We need the vitamin D. This is going to be absolutely chaos. Interesting.
So people prepare for some cataclysmic events, some sun, moon, and stars going dark in fires, earthquakes, lightning, thunders, the sea life dying. It doesn't get any better from here. This is just the beginning and it's getting bad. So I would say prepare. Prepare with your relationship with God, prepare with your walk, also prepare with storable food, have a plan, have some communications with some loved ones and family and friends. Set up a plan because things are going to go from bad to worse. And definitely,
Absolutely.
definitely, whatever if you don't do any of those, at least sharpen your walk with God Almighty and
Amen.
follow in the footsteps of Yeshua. All right, let's move on to verse 13, which it states, Then I saw and heard a messenger hovering in the heavens, and he shouted with a great voice, Woe, woe, woe to those dwelling upon the earth, because the voice of the shofars which are required are yet to be blown from the three messengers.
Oh my. So there's more coming and it just seems dreadful.
Mhm.
The word for woe, oi, 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 and it means you better prepare. Absolutely a dreadful sound. Now, here's this imagery which is fascinating. This messenger is actually floating in the heavens. It says he's floating or he's hovering, and you have in the Greek to English, the scriptures, you have flying, he's literally flying. And of course, the Murdoch has he flew. So now we have between the hovering and the floating versus the flying angel. Interesting.
I'll tell you what, seeing the word hovered or hovering, it makes me think about back in Genesis when God hovered over the face of the waters. And that's just, oh, gives me chills.
Wow. Wow. What an imagery. That's
Hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also notice in this verse in our Hebrew Cochin, it says, which are required. Now, I don't see that in the King James. I don't see that in the Aramaic. We actually have an addition here. We have something that is not found in the other text.
Absolutely. And it is saying that it is required. So now we have this is required, and that judgment has been prescribed. Judgment has been prescribed. And what you need to understand is when you look at any scriptures that says in that day, there's a prescribed day of judgment upon the earth for the sins of the people. And now we've got this, it's required. Judgment has begun, judgment has been given. And oh my goodness, whoa, whoa, whoa. There are three more shofars that are about to be blown. And now we've got something more dreadful coming ahead of us. Prayer life is going to be key here. I tell you, this is going to be absolutely fascinating. But the scriptures and the Murdoch Aramaic doesn't have that. I have to wonder though, is it in the Crawford Aramaic, Brian?
Let's check it out.
So it says, and I heard the to the eagle. Is that really to the eagle? An eagle flying and spreading in the skies, the heavens, that woe, woe, woe to its inhabitants of the earth. From the voices or sounds of the shofars or trumpets of three messengers prepared to sound. See, and even they use the word sounding versus the blowing.
Just the sounding. There is no
Okay,
which are required in that verse.
that's true. There is no which are required in the Crawford Aramaic. I don't know. We've got
Mhm.
something a little different
Yeah.
in the Scroll of Mysteries. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So, look, people, we're going to be completely honest with you. Either this little spot here, which says which are required, either that got added in somehow. That happens. People add to the text. Sometimes it slides in, or perhaps the Greek lost it. Maybe the
Mm,
scribe was copying across and he just skipped over those couple of words. It's a possibility. We don't know, but it appears we have something additional put into our text that is not found in the other ones. Very interesting stuff. We're not holding anything back. We're going to give you the truth and the information no matter what.
Absolutely.
All right, and that concludes our chapter 8 walkthrough of the Hebrew and Cochin and Revelations. So grateful to have our audience here learning with us, helping with us, being a part of this very historic thing that we're doing here. We want to say please like, subscribe, share, add a comment. We love the comments, and hit the bell notification. We want this to spread. We give this out for free, and also we don't ask anything. We just want you to share it out. That's really the only thing we ask. We don't ask for money. We don't ask for anything else. But you can download your own interlinear. If you go down to the description sections, you'll be able to see the link to academia.edu, which you can download this for free. And you can email it out to all your friends, family, and you can even email it to some people that you don't like, just to mess with them, just to crank them up a little bit if you want to have some fun with it. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you are pursuing truth with all your might. And as always, keep reading your Bible. And God bless.